Joining us now is Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, a member of the Senate Homeland Security. Not really a need for security there, but Senator, what's your take? Is that enough for the Speaker to say, hey, apologize?
Well, you know, there's never an excuse really for any kind of physical altercation, and, you know, what is acceptable really ends up being between the parties. I don't think anybody outside can say what's acceptable, but I think people can say what's unacceptable is any kind of physical altercation with the press or with anybody else. And, you know, anybody pushing or shoving, and you don't know everything unless you're in the room, but it sounds pretty bad from the reports that we've heard.
And do you think he should withdraw?
Well, I think that, you know, the resolution of it's going to be up to him, and it's going to be up to, you know, the reporter, actually, and to the court system. And so I guess I can't really get involved with facts that I don't know, but I can tell you that there just isn't any excuse for anybody putting hands on each other, reporters or politicians.
Don Lemon said last night he kind of blames this all on Trump because of his anti-media views, saying bad things about him. What's your reaction to that?
You know, Thomas Jefferson was quite harsh on the media for things they reported about him. So was John Adams. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were harsh on each other. You know, political discourse is an adult game as far as verbiage and, you know, arguments that we make. But I don't think anything Donald Trump, I've never heard him ever excuse things that would be related to violence.
Here's his remarks, the President, Senator, to NATO, all our NATO members, about paying their fair share when it comes to defense. Here's what he said.
Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves.
He said only 23 of the countries are not paying their 2%. That's the same thing candidate Trump said. Is that the right tone for the first meeting with NATO members who were already questioning the President's commitment to the alliance?
Absolutely right. I say hoorah. Good job, Mr. President. They need to be told that. And interestingly, I saw a quote the other day that said even President Obama had called some of the NATO allies freeloaders for basically relying on us to do everything and pay for everything. Not only that, look at the UN. We pay for 25% of the UN and have one vote. So, yes, I do think it's high time that our allies pay more. And it doesn't have to be something that makes relations worse, but it should be that they're put on notice. We expect more from them. And so, absolutely. We'll have a $500 billion deficit in our country this year, and we have a $20 trillion deficit. So by all means, our allies need to pony up and pay more.
So I'm watching a lot of this John Brennan's remarks yesterday when he was in, or 2 days ago when he was in a public hearing in front of the House. And one of the questions, you know, he was asked, he says, listen, we knew the Russians were involved. We told the President. In fact, I told my counterpart, back off. It's going to backfire on you. Stay out of our elections. And they continued. Mike Morrell heard this and said this morning on CBS, Cut 29. Mike Morrell is former acting director of the CIA.
So what struck me, Charlie, is that the U.S. government was concerned enough last summer about Russian interference in the election that they had the CIA director make contact with his Russian counterpart and tell them to stop. And the Russians clearly didn't. So my question is, what did the Obama administration do after that, after they learned that the warning had fallen on deaf ears?
Well, it appears they did nothing.
It appears they did nothing.
Is that something that you were thinking about, too?
Well, I think the whole situation, it's easy to determine that there was bad actors, and bad actors like Russia are trying to interfere in our election. I think we all kind of accept that. Figuring out what to do is more difficult. You know, you can call them and tell them to back off, but obviously that didn't work. You can have other diplomatic ways of trying to push back on pressure. But ultimately, I think what it tells us, and the one thing we do need to spend some money and time and effort on, is we have to have cyber security. We have to have protection of our own data. The Clinton campaign wasn't very good at it. The Republican campaign turned out they were a little bit better about opening attachments that they were sent. And so, you know, we do have to protect ourselves. And I think that in this world of cyber espionage, that goes without question. Can we make other bad actors behave? No, it's a little harder. In fact, if they're a bad actor by their very nature, they're probably going to continue to do these things. So we have to protect ourselves. But it's not only that. I mean, we have cyber espionage and commercial espionage from China and all other places. And the rule of thumb that I put forward is that anybody that can spy does, including our country. And so we're going to have more and more protections against spying, and really that includes encryption, which is one of the reasons I thought Comey was putting forward the wrong idea by making code easier for people to get around.
Wow. Senator Paul, you know that Circa report yesterday that came out that showed the NSA was going beyond their jurisdictions in spying on Americans from 2011 on. Didn't even set up the protocols that by law they were supposed to, that would have restricted some of their behavior. We're just at the tip of the iceberg. You were the first one, and to say this that I know of, that you were extremely concerned about the latitude. What's your reaction from this Circa report?
This report is alarming for a couple of reasons. One, they weren't obeying their own rules on searching Americans' private phone call data and perhaps even conversations. The other thing that should concern everybody is we're not talking about 10 Americans. We're talking about millions of Americans. Imagine this. There's this enormous cable running under the Atlantic, or maybe it's a satellite transmission. Everything going out and coming in can be sucked up. We have computers so powerful that every bit of information going into that cable can be sucked out. And what they suck out is conversations with people they're interested in, but also they suck out if, let's say you're a reporter at Fox News and you're writing a story and you have the word Assad in an email to your reporter in Syria, that's been sucked out and you are now in their data system, and they can search Brian Kilmeade and find out your information, even though you're in the press. I guarantee, in fact, who are the people who probably list in their transmission specific names more than anybody else? Like the word Baghdadi, the guy that's the head of ISIS, who's going to write that? Probably not cousins are writing that. There might be, but the press is probably doing that all the time. So every transmission, every time you say that, it's being gobbled up by the NSA and looked at. Right. And if they're not protecting you as a member of the press or protecting you as an American, that's a real problem. And it looks like the Obama administration was not protecting people well.
Senator, I know that everyone was has been pretty happy with this trip, even President Trump detractors. One thing was a red flare for you. You don't love the $109 billion arms deal to Riyadh. Why?
I'm concerned about where the weapons go once they get to Saudi Arabia. One of the things that came out of WikiLeaks was Hillary Clinton's comment to Jonathan Podesta. She wrote him and said, we need to put pressure on Saudi Arabia and Qatar because they're supplying arms and financial assistance to ISIS and other radical Sunni factions in the war. That should scare the heck out of us. It's somebody that we think is that big ally that we're giving $350 billion worth of weapons to. In a private email, Hillary Clinton was acknowledging that some of those weapons and some of that money was going directly to ISIS and to radical Sunni groups. That's a real problem for me, and there ought to be some indication that the behavior is changing. My other problem with it is I think it feeds an arms race. When Iran sees all of these weapons being purchased by Saudi Arabia, what is their response? It's to increase their weapons arsenal as well. So I think it pushes and ratchets up the arms race in the Middle East.
So we have a leak problem. Not only is the president's conversation with the Filipino leader now out in public, as well as his comments about North Korea in the Oval Office out in public, but Theresa May is angry that some of the investigation got into our papers that was shared with intelligence agencies. What's your message to American intelligence agencies?
You know, I want them to spy on the enemy. I want even our domestic agencies to eavesdrop on people for whom they have a warrant from a judge with a name on it. See, I've never been against collecting information. If you have someone's name and you have probable cause, some kind of evidence that links them to a crime, you can usually get a warrant. What I don't want is all of Chicago's information or all of Nashville or where I live, all of Bowling Green. I don't want all of the information of everybody's phone call sucked up into a massive computer that can be searched for Americans without a warrant. And that's my big beef.
Senator Rand Paul, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.